Well, for more, we can speak to Hanna Hundal, a climate activist and a delegate at the conference in Belém. She's normally based in California, joining us now here on Paris Direct. Thank you very much, Hanna. You've attended 4 of the previous COPs. What was your takeaway from Brazil?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the chance to be with you. I think Brazil was sort of a mixed bag. We had some wins, some progress, and we also had some setbacks. And I think overall, we have to remember that this was billed as the COP of implementation. And naturally, when one thinks about implementation, we think about rolling out or at least codifying a plan to roll out agreements that were reached at previous COP conferences. And what I think a through line that really came into play in this conference is that a lot of the agreements that came to bear at COP28 in Dubai 2 years ago, we didn't quite make that much progress on actually implementing those, kind of in antithetical to the overall theme of the conference. So I think there is a sense of palpable disappointment among a lot of my delegates here, but we did have some progress along the way.
Yeah, and the notable difference from Dubai to Belém was who the U.S. president was, what the administration was. Was this ultimately a disappointment because of the U.S. boycott? Without a president willing to throw America's economic weight around, petrostates could be more disruptive.
Absolutely. When we come to these conferences, it's really quite a special thing because you have 194 parties that came to Belém, and these are countries of different, national wealth, different geopolitical strength, and they really come together at the same table, get to air their concerns and press each other face to face on matters of climate. And so that equalizing, that leveling is really important. It's an important opportunity for the big emitters, the big historical emitters, such as the United States, to be able to take accountability with developing nations that are acutely bearing the brunt of climate change, but did very little to actually contribute to it in the first place. And so the fact that the United States could not actually bring a high level delegation to the conference was disappointing. And I think that void was acutely felt.
Yeah, and that's why we run into overtime to reach this final agreement. Can you talk us through that process? It was supposed to end on Friday. What did delegates have to do when it ran over to reach that final agreement?
Yeah, this is my fifth COP conference, and all 5 of them have actually ran into overtime. So that's sort of par for the course. But I think the tensions were actually quite high because, again, this was supposed to be the implementation COP, and people were very hungry for action and hungry for more than incremental change. What ended up actually passing were a couple of wins. We had a tripling of climate finance. So the goal now is to roll out $120 billion a year by 2035 to enable developing countries to brace for and grapple with the impacts of climate change on the ground. So that's a positive for adaptation. We also had the adoption of the Belém action mechanism, which is essentially understanding that we need to have a just, fair, and equitable inclusion of developing countries into the renewable energy economy of the future. So those are some bright spots, and I think that's part of why the conference sort of went into overtime. But the tensions are certainly high when delegates have been here for weeks on end and they're just trying to hammer out an agreement.
Yeah, perhaps another bright spot also when you look at Brazil hosting this in contrast to the 3 previous COPs. Pardon. We saw protesters there. We could hear dissenting voices. We saw indigenous groups outside. That was something, because of the locations of the 3 previous COPs, we didn't see as much of. What was that like on the ground?
It was really quite something. It had been quite clear from the Brazilian government early on that this location, Belém, was chosen very intentionally. It's on the edge of the Amazon, and it was really meant to, make the delegates feel the heat, quite literally. And I think it did that in many ways. I mean, we also saw a lot of indigenous communities who call the Amazon home, at one point in time actually stormed the entrance of the conference. And there was a real juxtaposition between, these indigenous activists who are demanding accountability, and then inside the conference, the fact that you actually have fossil fuel lobbyists. And so really that stark contrast, I think, was something, really stunning to witness. I think also, though, the overall role of civil society, of civil actors, activists, protesters, and advocates was very important in, for example, advancing that Belém action mechanism that I talked about earlier. They did a really good job in actually making sure that that was prominent at the conference when a lot of other priorities ended up not getting included in the final text.
Yeah, and so COP30 aimed to be about implementation, regardless of whether it achieved that. Let's look ahead. COP31 in Turkey. What is it going to be about, and how's it going to operate with Turkey hosting it, but Australia leading the negotiation process?
There have been a couple of COP conferences like that before as well. So it'll be really interesting to see this time too. I think really this idea of the implementation COP, that's what COP30 was billed as, but I think that ethos will have to carry into COP31 because there still are several measures that people really wanted more progress on that didn't quite make it into the final official text. For example, deforestation, the bill to end deforestation, that kind of actually built on a promise that was made at COP28 in Dubai. And unfortunately, that didn't make it into the final agreement this time. I would like to see more progress on that when we look into next year. I think climate finance is always a big deal at these conferences. And, we can get these pledges, but does the actual other side of the equation come through? That is to say, the money, does it actually flow to these developing countries the way it's pledged to? That's something we always have to kind of keep our eye on the ball for that.
And given the Trump administration boycotting this event, he'll still be in power next year as well. Should delegates already be preparing themselves for disappointment next year?
I think President Trump has been quite clear about his stance on climate change, which is to say that he does not deem it to be an issue, which is rather unfortunate. What's really interesting is that earlier this year, the UN's top court, the International Court of Justice, said that essentially they rendered an advisory opinion, which is non-binding, but the advisory opinion said that the agreements reached at these COP conferences, parties are obliged to follow through. And so I think it'll be quite interesting to see that juxtaposed with the actions that the Trump administration is taking in terms of rolling back the United States' involvement in these global climate convenings that they've been involved in for a long time and have been part of these agreements. So how will that actually pan out? I think, from a legal perspective, that'll be interesting to watch and may, in fact, provide a model when we think about whether other countries are going to try to follow the suit of the United States.
Indeed. And Hanna, maybe you can give us an update next year from Turkey. Hanna Hundal, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.